Chapter 6 is the human body chapter. It's one of the most important chapters in the entire book. Without a solid foundation of anatomy and physiology, I can't envision a way that you could be successful in this course or that you could ever pass the National Registry and work as an EMT. So focus on this, work really hard on getting your foundation of the human body. I would challenge you not to stop with what we have in this EMT book, but go on and take anatomy and physiology as a college course. Learn everything you can about the human body that will make you a better clinician and in the end allow you to provide better patient care for your patients. Anatomy is the structure of the human body, and physiology is the function of the human body. If you understand those, you can assess your patient's condition, and that will allow you to communicate your findings to hospital personnel, other healthcare providers. All of that will work together in providing the continuity of care that your patients need as you treat their emergent conditions, provide stabilizing treatment, and then transfer that care on to other healthcare professionals, hopefully seeing improvement in your patient's condition each time care is transferred as they move through the continuum of care from your first contact pre-hospitally all the way through to their discharge and return to their normal life, we hope. Landmarks are different areas and structures that we use as a reference in what we call the topographic anatomy of our patients. On the surface of the body, that would be topographic. We use landmarks such as the mastoid process, the bony prominence just posterior to the ear. You can reach back with your hand, you can find that. That is an important landmark. If we have a patient with an injury like a basilar skull fracture, over a period of a few hours, our patient may start to have ecchymosis or bruising over that mastoid process. We call that Battle's sign, Battle '(S), after good old Dr. Battle, who first observed the correlation between this ecchymosis or bruising around the mastoid process and a basilar skull fracture. What is a basilar skull fracture? Think of the floor that your brain sits on in the skull, at a fracture to that connection of bones that form the floor that your brain sits on. If that is fractured due to head trauma, we call that a basilar skull fracture, and you'll see things such as battle signs there over the mastoid process. If you don't know what the mastoid process is, you don't know to look there, you don't see that correlation, and you may miss a major finding that's going to be important in determining what's wrong with the patient, treating that effectively, and passing that information on to another clinician. Another landmark, let's say something like the xiphoid process. If you follow your sternum all the way down, you will find a protrusion at the inferior termination of the sternum. That's the xiphoid process. That's cartilage. You can use that as a landmark to describe what you find with your patient. So there are multiple landmarks around the body. You need to learn those and be able to utilize those. As we work through each chapter, these chapters are broken down by body systems and problems that you find due to illness or injuries affecting those body systems, landmarks will be mentioned in the topographic anatomy of your patient, and you can utilize those in assessment and treatment of your patients. What is the skeleton? That is what gives this thing we call the human body a recognizable human form. It's, as your book says, a collection of bones, ligaments, tendons, and cartilage. What does that mean? We know what bones are, right? They're the hard rock-like structures that have various sizes and shapes throughout the body. They are shaped in such a way as to provide a particular structure and function for the body. Different bones have different shapes. The ends of different bones have different shapes. Let's think about the head of the femur or the head of the humerus. That forms part of a ball and socket joint. What does a ball and socket joint do? It allows for rotational movement, like a circular movement almost. And you have more of that range of motion with the shoulder than you have with the hip, but you do have some of that rotational type movement with the hip. That's a very specialized type of joint for a very specialized type of function. Then you have hinge joints like your knee. If your knee moves in a circular motion, you have damaged your knee. You have an injury that is going to require treatment and a time of healing. So if we exceed the range of motion of a joint, or if we put a stress on a joint that causes that joint to move in a direction other than what it's designed to do, we damage that joint. We damage ligaments, we damage tendons, we damage cartilage. Ligaments, what are they? Ligaments connect bone to bone. If you've ever rolled your ankle, sprained your ankle, you've stretched ligaments in your ankle. And it takes time for that injury to heal. Ligaments that are stretched, they're not like rubber. They don't snap back to their uninjured state. You will, in all likelihood, have stretched ligaments that will allow for some permanent instability in that joint. So what do we do about that? Just let it flop around? No, with things like physical therapy and strengthening and conditioning, we can use muscle tone and muscle tension to compensate for stretched ligaments. Tendons connect muscle to bone. Why is that important? When muscles contract, the tendons pull on bones, and that provides movement. And that muscle relaxes, and then an opposing muscle contracts. That allows for movement in the opposite direction. That movement and that opposition in movement allows for work of the muscle, and combined work of muscles move bones and allow us to do things such as walk, write with a pen, type on our keyboards. Everything that we do is a contraction of muscles, relaxation of muscles, and kind of the choreographed nature of that. All of that working in balance, working in concert, allows us to do what humans do. Cartilage provides a gliding surface for joints to move. It's possible to tear cartilage. Sometimes that requires surgical repair. Think of all kinds of football injuries. Knees are very susceptible to torn cartilage, and that often requires surgical repair. Same with shoulders, hip joints. We can damage cartilage throughout our bodies. We think of the skeletal system as being extremely tough. It's fragile at the same time. The tough nature of it, that strength of bones, that skeletal system provides protection for fragile organs. Think about your heart. Your heart, with a direct impact to the heart, can actually cause fibrillation, cause the heart to stop, requiring CPR and then defibrillation, or sending an electrical current through the heart to stop all the disorganized activity and allow for a reset so that the normal pacing of the heart can take over, get that heart going again. By having the thoracic cavity, having the ribs that help form that thoracic cavity, that protects our lungs, protects our heart, protects the great vessels in the chest, even protects the liver. If you move down to your right lower rib cage there by the costal arch, that liver is tucked up under that, just above the right upper quadrant of your abdomen. That is very important protection, and blunt force trauma to that area can cause internal bleeding, cause severe injury, even cause death. So it's very important that we have that skeletal system to provide that protection. I've already talked about movement, how that works. We understand how bones give us our shape. Bones also are very important in red blood cells, the production of red blood cells, or genesis of red blood cells. That takes place in the bone marrow. The maintenance of calcium that our body uses, our cells use calcium all the time. Our heart uses calcium to beat. Strength in our bones is provided with calcium. So maintenance of calcium and phosphorus are extremely important, and the skeletal system is very important in those things. Respiratory system. What is the importance of the respiratory system? That is how we get the core requirement of all of the cells in our body is oxygen. Without oxygen and the perfusion of oxygen, or circulating oxygen into our bloodstream, circulating that oxygen out to our cells and to the organs of our body won't last very long. The brain would be the first organ damaged by lack of oxygen. Other organs, as we'll learn later in the course, can survive longer without oxygen. That is absolute requirement of the body. Our respiratory system is the pump, I guess. I'm thinking of pumping a gas, not that would be the respiratory system, and the process of ventilation, moving air in and out. That provides the oxygen and brings the oxygen in, and then helps eliminate the carbon dioxide. Think of the structures involved in ventilation. We have to have contraction of the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm to expand the thoracic cavity, provide negative pressure, and that pressure gradient, by having a lower pressure in the thoracic cavity, allows air to move from the ambient air around us through our mouth, nose, through our posterior pharynx, down through our larynx. Now we're in the lower airway, down our trachea, hits the carina, where the trachea divides into the right bronchus and the left bronchus. Then that divides into bronchioles. Then eventually that reaches the alveolar sacs that contain capillary membranes. And when the oxygen reaches those capillary membranes, that oxygen, because of a difference in pressures, carbon dioxide in deoxygenated blood and oxygen in sitting at that alveolar membrane, those have differing pressures, about 104 millimeters mercury of pressure of the oxygen at that alveolar membrane. That carbon dioxide has between 35 and 45 millimeters of mercury pressure. That gradient allows for oxygen to move across that membrane and into the bloodstream, and then the carbon dioxide moves out and crosses that membrane, and then we're able to exhale that carbon dioxide. That is respiration. That's alveolar respiration. So we always make a big deal in lab talking about the ventilatory rate. That is moving air in and out. Respiration is that gas exchange. That gas exchange across that alveolar membrane takes place because of diffusion. And then those oxygen molecules attach to hemoglobin on red blood cells. You can load 4 molecules onto the red blood cell, and that's circulated throughout the body, moves out into the tissues. We'll spend a lot more time on that later, but that is that basic process of how we have ventilation and also how we have respiration. The circulatory system, that involves the heart, and then all what this slide calls it tubes, all the tubes, the arteries, the arterioles, capillaries, venules, veins, that all connect in a closed system to circulate blood. And again, that blood is carrying nutrients, but it's one of the big functions on those red blood cells is carrying oxygen around to tissues and organs. Organ is a collection of common tissues, so it circulates that oxygen around to organs, and then that gets us down to the capillaries, and then those capillaries connect to venules. We're down to areas that are 1 red blood cell in diameter. We're talking extremely small. And then through diffusion again, carbon dioxide moves into that deoxygenated blood, deoxygenated, the oxygen has been removed or decreased greatly. There is some leftover oxygen. But the carbon dioxide moves into the blood, and then there in the venules, those venules connect into larger structures called veins, and then those veins eventually return to the 2 great vessels for the upper body. That would be the superior vena cava, and for the lower body it would be the inferior vena cava. Those connect into the right atrium of the heart. The right side of the heart has deoxygenated blood. The left side has oxygenated blood. From the right atrium, blood goes through tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, through the pulmonary arteries, moving away from the heart. That deoxygenated blood is pumped out to the lungs and connects back to that respiratory system that we just talked about. Together, these form the cardiorespiratory system. Those work in concert to maintain homeostasis, right? Keeping our body alive. Nervous system. Nervous system is extremely complex. Every time I think I've learned something about the nervous system, then I read and dig deeper, and then I feel like I know nothing and start to try to add to my knowledge. It's extremely complex. Very amazing system. I think the entire human body is amazing. I fancy myself a student of the human body, but the more I know, the less I feel like I know, because of the amazing amount of information that there is, the amazing number of things that you can learn about the body. So what is the nervous system? That will be central nervous system, will be your brain and spinal cord. And then you have spinal nerves exiting at each vertebra, and then that moves out into a complex network called peripheral nerves. The peripheral nervous system is everything other than the brain and spinal cord. Skin, very important. That's the bag that holds these bones together, that makes us look the way we look. So what are the functions, the structure and function of the skin? Let's talk about structure. The epidermis is the top layer of the skin, and that top layer's epidermis, that is what we see when we look at a person. And as we move deeper, once you move past the epidermis, you're into the dermis. The dermis has specialized structures such as sensory nerves, hair follicles. Some of us don't have too many hair follicles to worry about on the top of our heads. Others are in better shape than me. And then we have sweat glands, we have sebaceous glands. All of those structures lie within the dermis. And then when we move below the dermis, we're getting down into muscle. This will be talking about the epidermis, the dermis, and deeper. That will be important when we study soft tissue injuries, especially burns. We'll spend a lot of time on that. Skin is the largest organ in the body. What does your skin do for you? It protects you from your environment. What does that mean? Your skin helps protect the deeper structures, such as your organs, from drastic heat and cold changes. Your skin prevents the penetration of some chemical substances from moving deeper into the body. Others are absorbed through the skin, and we have to be concerned about that as we talk about poisonings and even the administration of medications. It's not always a bad thing for things to be absorbed through the skin. We use things like nitroglycerin paste for cardiac patients. That's absorbed through the skin. That's beneficial to the right patient at the right time. And then it helps regulate your body temperature. If you think about it, your body operates, normal operation of your body takes place in a very narrow temperature range. If you think about the average normal body temperature of being 98.6, which is 37 Fahrenheit, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, or 37 degrees Celsius, if you take that on up to having a temperature of 100, we don't feel very good when we have a temperature of 100. Or if we knock that 98.6 down to 94, we're hypothermic. We don't feel very well. So we operate in a very narrow temperature range, and our skin is very important in doing that. If we get too cold, our skin senses that cold, it translates that information onto the body, and then our muscles start to shiver to try to raise that body temperature. And then your skin transmits information from the environment to the brain. You think about if you touch a feather with your finger, your skin and the nerves in your skin, the sensory nerves, send information to your brain that I'm touching a feather. Or I reach down here and pet my dog, and she seems to appreciate that. And my dog's soft fur on her head, that has a feeling. My sensory nerves in my hand transmit that information to my brain, and I understand what I'm touching based on previous experience and information stored in my brain. If I touch the blade of a knife or a sharp pin, then I have a sensation through sensory nerves and through information in my brain that tells me what I just touched. Digestive system, very important. Digestive system from the lips to the anus, I guess you could say. That's the old digestive system. The gastrointestinal tract, that's the stomach, and then the small intestine and large intestine, also called the small bowel and the colon. The colon is the large intestine. Your mouth, your salivary glands, pharynx, esophagus, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, rectum, and anus. That gets you all the way through the whole system. Digestion of food, that starts from the time food is taken into your mouth. Mastication, that's a wild word, right? That's chewing up food. And then enzymes in saliva start to break down that food, and we swallow that food, and then hydrochloric acid in the stomach starts to break that food down further, and there's a churning type movement in the stomach that swishes all that around, helps break down that food. Certain things are absorbed by the stomach through that mucous membrane. In the stomach, the mucous membrane that lines the stomach it's a protective layer that keeps that hydrochloric acid from eating through the stomach muscle. But that mucous membrane is also important in absorbing certain medications, certain nutrients from foods. Then that churned up mash of food moves out and into the duodenum, which is that most proximal portion of the small intestine. It's closest to the stomach, and in the duodenum, other nutrients are absorbed into the body, and more churning and movement. Peristalsis helps remove water from and liquids from that chyme, they call it, that's moved out of the stomach. That gets churned around. This is part of digestion. Eventually it makes its way through that I think it's 28 to 32 feet of small intestine in an adult. And the cecum is where the small intestine connects to the large intestine. And then in the large intestine, that squeezing action of the colon removes more liquid as the waste material moves on through the colon. The final amount of nutrients and liquid are removed and absorbed, and then That fecal matter, that waste material, eventually by peristalsis moves on the right side from the right lower quadrant to the right upper quadrant. That's the ascending colon. Then from the right upper quadrant to the left upper quadrant. That's the transverse colon. Then down the descending colon from the left upper quadrant to the left lower quadrant. Then the rectosigmoid colon connects the terminal portion of the descending colon to the rectum, and then from the rectum out through the anus. And that is beginning to end how that works. Endocrine system. This is a feedback system. Very complex. This is how messages and control systems are integrated to maintain bodily functions and the homeostasis of the body. We'll talk about just the tip of the iceberg of this really as we move through the course. What are hormones? Epinephrine, adrenaline. Adrenaline is what we call the natural occurring substance in our body. That's important in our fight or flight system. The adrenal glands sit on the superior aspect of both kidneys, and in a stress situation, adrenaline is released to trigger that fight or flight. So that the adrenal glands excrete epinephrine, and that epinephrine enters the bloodstream. It's circulated out to the body. It goes throughout the body, but in the fight or flight situation, there are receptors on structures in the body that allow for a chemical connection that trigger a certain reaction within the body. For instance, you have one heart, so the beta-1 receptors connect with the beta-1 portion of adrenaline that causes increase in heart rate and an increase in the contractility of the heart. So the heart is moving more blood out. That increases the stroke volume and the minute volume of the heart. And that provides perfusion so we can stand up and fight, or we can flight. We can beat feet and get out of here. The beta-2 receptors in the lungs, 2 lungs, beta-2. The beta-2 properties of adrenaline, that makes a connection in the lungs with the lungs, with the bronchi and bronchioles in the lungs, the smooth muscle there, that causes bronchodilation, so we can move more air through, so as we can get more oxygen to the body. And then alpha properties, the smooth muscle that surrounds the peripheral arteries in the body, the alpha properties of adrenaline make a chemical connection with the alpha receptors in the smooth muscle around the arteries, and that causes contraction, that causes vasoconstriction. So that is how this feedback system works. As we go through body systems, we will talk about this. We don't need to teach the whole course right now. Urinary system, very important. Comprised of your kidneys, your ureters, your urinary bladder, and your urethra. Kidneys filter waste products from the blood, and then that liquid waste is urine. It moves from the kidneys down connecting tubes that go from each kidney down to the urinary bladder. Those connecting tubes are ureters, and the bladder accumulates urine as your bladder becomes full. There are stretch receptors that sense when the bladder's full, sending a signal to your brain that it is time to urinate. We've got to dump a load of urine that has built up here so we can collect more, because we have to maintain this filter system to keep the body functioning correctly. And we'll learn when we talk about shock here in a couple of weeks. We'll talk about how the kidneys are involved in maintaining blood pressure. And then briefly later in the course, we'll talk about how kidneys are involved in maintaining the acid-base balance within the body. Again, our body operates within a very narrow pH, percentage of hydrogen ion concentration, from 7.35 pH to 7.45, a very narrow range. Below 7.35 is acidotic. Above 7.45 is alkalotic. And we'll spend some time on that. It's very complex. Takes a while to learn it. Come to advanced EMT class in paramedic school. We will teach you a lot more about it. Genital system, that's in the male and female reproductive system, and the genital system is obviously involved in reproduction. Collectively, we refer to the genital system and the urinary system as the genitourinary system, abbreviated GU system, or GU tract, genitourinary tract. Finally, pathophysiology is a study of how the body reacts to diseases. Let's add injuries there. Trauma is a disease, and there is a pathophysiology of trauma, just like there is a pathophysiology of heart disease or respiratory disease. As you learn the normal structure and function of the body, you gain a working knowledge of anatomy and physiology. That is absolutely necessary. You have to have that. To effectively diagnose, I shouldn't have put that word in there, doctors diagnose, to effectively determine what is wrong with your patient, what you believe to be wrong, or form your clinical impression of what injury or illness your patient has. You have to have a knowledge of pathophysiology. You have to have a knowledge of how injuries and disease affect the body, how the body reacts to them. Then you can provide the appropriate treatment to stabilize your patient until you can get them to a physician for definitive treatment. Eventually, hopefully, return them to their normal life. Once you understand anatomy and physiology, and once you understand the pathophysiological effects of disease and injuries on the body, you can provide appropriate care for your patients, and then we will call you a clinician. That is the purpose of this course. Hope this review helped you some. Dig deeper into your book. Work hard on anatomy and physiology. Work hard on pathophysiology and treatment, and you're going to do great in this course. Thank you.